Hello, puppies and kittens. We are still slogging our way through this blasted Bible thing. Anybody have any opening comments before we dive into 2 Samuel the 21st?
Yeah. Okay. A couple opening comments. Yeah. First of all, yeah, Peter really fucked that one up. I saw how it was just
that's not me. That's StreamYard. For some reason, it doesn't let me grab it anymore.
Sounds like a you problem, buddy.
Yeah. Says the guy whose computer stops working every 10 minutes.
Yeah, it really does. It's really fucked up.
Chad, if anyone has the money, we need to get Lawrence a new computer. Okay.
I've been saving up for a while, but then I ended up needing to get a new car, so I was like, well, fuck. That's more useful.
Yeah, and we're also looking at monetization, which is a little bit difficult since Lawrence opens with 3 F-bombs in the first minute.
Oh, I at least try and keep the, George Carlin's 7 dirty words to like after the first 15 minutes.
That's quite funny, but you are absolutely true. You're absolutely right. So I am actually very excited about these chapters. Not so much chapter 21, but chapter 22 I'm excited about because it's actually going to be part of my capstone paper. I'm going to be talking about it in depth.
Hopefully we'll finish this book, though I have no idea.
Yeah, so I'm going to have quite a lot to say on that poem because that poem is also basically synonymous with Psalm 18.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, gonna have a lot of thoughts. All right, that's my only opening thing.
And there's also a lot of Christian theology that's pointing at chapter 22, saying, "Oh, look, this is foreshadowing Christ." So,
I've also heard stupid people speak. Yeah.
This is the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so who's reading today?
Okay, well that's exciting. So yeah.
Yeah, I think Mark should start.
Yeah, Mark.
All
you
right,
should do that. Chapter 21.
Let's do it. All right, let me grab that real quick.
It's on 20 verses, so you can just do all of it.
Okay. During David's reign, there was a famine for 3 consecutive years. So David inquired of the Lord. The Lord said, "It is because of Saul and his blood-stained family, because he murdered the Gibeonites." So the king summoned the Gibeonites and spoke with them. Now the Gibeonites were not descendants of Israel. They were a remnant of the Amorites. The Israelites had made a promise to them, but Saul tried to kill them because of his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah. David said to the Gibeonites, "What can I do for you? How can I make amends so that you will bless the Lord's inheritance?" The Gibeonites said to him, "We have no claim to silver or gold from Saul or from his family, nor would we be justified in putting to death anyone in Israel." David asked, "What then are you asking me to do for you?" They replied to the king, "As for this man who exterminated us and who schemed against us so that we were destroyed and left without status throughout all the borders of Israel, let 7 of his male descendants be turned over to us, and we will execute them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, who was the Lord's chosen one." And the king replied, "I will turn them over." The king had mercy on Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, in light of the Lord's oath that he had taken between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. So the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth, the 2 sons of Aiah's daughter, Rizpah, whom she had borne to Saul, and the 5 sons of Saul's daughter, Merab, whom she had borne to Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Meholathite. He turned them over to the Gibeonites, and they executed them on a hill before the Lord. The 7 of them died together. They were put to death during harvest time. during the first days of the beginning of the barley harvest. Rizpah and the daughter of Aiah took sackcloth and spread it out for herself on a rock. From the beginning of the harvest until the rain fell on them, she did not allow the birds of the air to feed on them by day, nor the wild animals by night. When David was told what Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, Saul's concubine, had done, he went and looked and took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the leaders of Jabesh Gilead. They had secretly taken them from the plaza at Beth Shan. It was there that Philistines publicly exposed their corpses after they had killed Saul at Gilboa. David brought the bones of Saul and of Jonathan, his son, from there. They also gathered up the bones of those who had been executed. They buried the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the land of Benjamin at Zelah, in the grave of his father Kish. After they had done everything that the king had commanded, God responded to their prayers for the land. Should I continue?
Yeah.
Okay. Another battle was fought between the Philistines and Israel. So David went down with his soldiers and fought the Philistines. David became exhausted. Now Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of Rapha, had a spear that had weighed 300 bronze shekels, and he was armed with a new weapon. He had said that he would kill David, but Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to David's aid, striking the Philistine down and killing him. Then David's men took an oath, saying, "You will not go out to battle with us again. You must not extinguish the lamp of Israel." Later, there was another battle with the Philistines, this time in Gob. On that occasion, Sibbecai the Hushathite killed Saph, who was one of the descendants of Rapha. Yet another battle occurred with the Philistines in Gob. On that occasion, Elhanan, the son of Jair, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Yet another battle occurred in Gath. On that occasion, there was a large man who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He too was a descendant of Rapha. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of David's brother, Shimeah, killed him. These were the 4 descendants of Rapha who lived in Gath. They were killed by David and his soldiers.
Well, the 6-fingered man should not have killed that guy's father.
So yeah, that story is especially interesting because it is abundantly clear that we are talking about the exact same Goliath, exact same person.
My text actually says Goliath, not
well, yeah,
Goliath's
no, the thing
brother.
is, the way that it is, the way that he's described is the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. So that's the exact same way that Goliath was. No, it's the exact same way that Goliath's spear was described. The
I
thing
actually,
is,
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to cover the first story here first a little bit.
Okay.
Before we get into how David is totally stealing glory for Goliath. Here we have a super fucked up story about human sacrifice at harvest time. We have the king spared Mephibosheth, but then gave Mephibosheth, but it was a totally different Mephibosheth, guys, totally, to be just killed in revenge for these people who'd been granted, like, massacred and attempted genocide by Saul. So they were salty about that, totally valid, but then they're just going to go and kill 7 men in cold blood, and because they're his descendants, punishing the sins of the sons and the fathers and yada yada yada. God is super just like that. And you also have something which is in a lot of myth is a theme of it's one of the few tropes that women are often depicted in, where the loyal female relative, the mother or the sister or the daughter of the person who's been killed, protects the bodies that have been left exposed by the person who was killed. This is what was it? In the story of Oedipus, someone that one of his daughters, I know, sister daughters, it ended up doing this for one of the family members. If I should have, I'm sorry, I should have looked it up in Oved, but it's definitely a trope, and the idea being that, you know, she's risking it because you're supposed to just leave the bodies exposed, but she's taking the risk to honor the bodies of her kin, which is very noble. But yeah, it even says here that the harvest was blessed, presumably because they performed this human sacrifice and left the bodies exposed on the hillside to the Lord, who's totally not a bloodthirsty sociopath.
Though I will say that Mephibosheth that is described here, like son of Jonathan, son of Saul, is not the same Mephibosheth as in verse 8. These are two different people.
Mm-hmm.
It gives a different mother, yeah, but I still find it
because you said that it's not it's the same guy, but it's not.
I just find the use of that name so close to each other a little sus, because we do know these stories get rewritten a lot.
Oh, sure, yeah, okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, but
I'm not saying it in text. It is not the same Mephibosheth, but considering how many times these things get spit polished, I find it suspect.
I would also add that not only is there a clear example here how this God takes pleasure or considers human blood as payment for something that, you know, he is demanding in the first place to be obedience or whatever, but also there being a clear connection with this ancient superstition that disobedience to their God resulted in natural disasters.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
that's something that happens like frequently.
Yeah,
The famine, like and the plague that happens because of the census when we see 24.
Yeah.
100%. But here we see that the land is blessed because of the human sacrifice. So this is literally God accepting the human sacrifice and blessing the harvest on account of it. Wicker Man.
And having like very immediate results, like something miraculous really did take place here that brought upon these rains again.
Yeah, which is faster than God usually works, right?
Way faster.
Your prayer is very important to us. Please wait 6,000 years for the next operator. Your prayer is very important to us.
Yeah, so these it's really interesting though. So this is what we're talking about in general is futility curses, and curses are blessings, right? So like sometimes like you will have something pop up because of like, or was it because of like because you fucked up like following the law or something, so like a cultic infraction. Other times it was just for not listening to just not listening to like God's call to do something. So you'd have different reasons for it. It happens quite often, but you'd have different reasons for it, and this is just one of the many times that we've seen that. But the whole giant like human sacrifice thing, or maybe not, because it's not like portrayed as exclusively a sacrifice, because like he's like, I'll get those guys. It kind of seems to me a few things, like we noted the famine especially, and then the Tomer, you mentioned you mentioned the census, but like for me at least, I'm seeing at least a couple. Like I don't think this is actually a source text for like the Egypt narrative, but I see like some similarities, right? Like there being a famine happens all the time, so it's not necessary. But then like the killing of the children is one thing. I don't know. There's probably nothing there. I'm probably just reading too much into it. But
Now, one of the things that came to mind when reading this for me was this whole concept of Rizpah, saving the bodies from being consumed by animals is what it sounds like.
yeah, that's
Right.
what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I presuppose that this is way too early to sort of have a crucifixion understanding of what usually was the thing happening on crucifixion, and this very much later
I mean,
Roman
I'm
practice.
sure.
So what's happening?
I'm sure someone has managed it.
See, here's the thing. It's not just that, but the whole like sacrificing of the 7 children, right?
Five.
That was it 5.
I
It says
think
that the
it's 5.
7 of them perished together.
No, it's 7. 7
Oh,
Yeah,
descendants,
2 and
male
5.
descendants of the
Yeah.
line of
I
Saul.
think I thought of the daughters of Merav. Though
Okay.
the Hebrew says Michal, but I'll get to that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one as well.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the big questions.
Well,
first-
hold on, Isaac. I just want to finish the
Okay.
one point I was making.
Oh.
So the thing is, yes, this would be definitely used later, in like the first, second centuries, right? Because this is, if you guys have, I think I forget if it's in First or Second Maccabees, where where this woman has 7 sons and she has to see them all die, and like she still maintains her faith. I forget if that's First or Second Maccabees.
That's Judith, I think.
I'm definitely thinking of a Book of Maccabees, 100%.
Yeah, no, I'm saying it's the lady's name. I think is Judith. No.
Oh, I don't remember her name. Like I know that Judith is a different text altogether too. So, but I'm definitely thinking of one of the Maccabees. Like she was like, they were all like, said, listen, if you don't convert,
Oh, yeah, it's Second Maccabees.
Second Maccabees, okay. Yeah, so if you don't convert, we're gonna kill you, and yeah, fucking take it, and we're gonna kill your kids or whatever. So she like maintains her faith or whatever. So it's a very, so something like this at least becomes a very, it's used for a totally different purpose in Second Maccabees, but so the stuff like this was definitely used in later periods, is the thing. So I wouldn't be surprised to see like some amount of this text pop up in theological works about Jesus.
How much ancient Christians I have? Only one.
And
Yeah.
then for the sorry, Isaac, you had a point you wanted to make.
Yeah. I think it's supposed to be you're talking of Judith and Holofernes, but the point I wanted to make is that the story starts
No.
off with like there's a famine.
No, I'm not.
No?
The story of Judith is a different text entirely.
Oh, so it's not mentioned in Maccabees at all?
It is
No.
mentioned in Second Maccabees, but it's not. But her name is not mentioned. I think
Yeah, this is a
in the
different.
book, the
okay.
book, she's called Hannah in the book of Josephon.
Oh, okay. Maybe he confused her with the Hannah and her 7 sons, which is a much earlier story. Whatever. So yeah, in the beginning of the chapter, there's a famine, and then David inquires of the Lord, and it says because of the blood guilt of Saul, blah blah blah, because he put to death some the Gibeonites, and then when the bodies are hanged or impaled or whatever, the rain doesn't come, right? It only comes when David kind of takes the Saul's body and reburies it, right? So it's kind of like so like I think Rashi, for example, tries to break down the statement in verse 1 and tries to say like, God says, the famine is because of Saul, because you haven't because his body is not buried properly, because of his bloody house, which is to do with him killing the priests of Nov, and the Gibeonites, and somehow that story is connected. But like, if you read it at face value, right, there's no mention of Nov, and it doesn't say that it's because Saul hasn't been buried, but it seems to be, when you read the end of the story, it kind of implies that was what God really wanted or something. But I guess the question is, why Nob isn't mentioned? Wouldn't that be, if you had read the story in order, that you would have thought that was Saul's big sin? When did he try to kill the Gibeonites? It's not mentioned until now, I don't think.
And here it also says that the men of Jabesh Gilead were the ones, and I believe it mentioned it previously too.
Yeah.
That rescued the body of Saul from the because the Philistines were playing sport, making sport of their bodies, and that they rescued the bodies of Saul and Jonathan.
Oh yeah, it says here there's no account of the crime against the Gibeonites for which Saul
I have a comment. I have a comment on this.
Yeah.
There may have been a connection to his slaughter of the priesthood of Nob.
Yeah. That's
quite possibly.
Weren't they the ones that pretended to be foreigners, but they were really close?
Yeah.
That's the Gibeonites. So they're mentioned in
Joshua. Yeah.
But they're not mentioned as Saul tried to kill them. Like it doesn't really mention this story. And then if you had read the story in order, Samuel 1, then you would have been like, okay, but wouldn't his big sin have been him killing the priest? No. So that's like the classic question.
But yeah, still I want to turn back to the Elhanan thing. So the thing is, from the text, like every scholar I've read at least, they do mention that there have been like some ways to, there have been some workarounds, but none of them have really been convincing, at least to the scholars I've read through. So the thing is, this probably was the origin of the narrative for David, right? Because think about it this way. So you have two people who would have been said to kill Goliath. You would have had Elhanan or David. So the David story, we've talked about this so many times about how there are many layers to it, and how it was this the myth of the United Monarchy was like this later kind of political fiction. And when you're writing like a narrative like that, there are two options you got to think about. So in one case, you have this great figure David, who like is it more likely that like someone writing about Elhanan would have clearly taken part of the David story and just kind of like snuck that in there? Everyone would be like, hey, this is David's story. What the fuck are you doing? But if you have a minor figure like Elhanan, and then you use his story for David's narrative, maybe less people would notice because they're not thinking about Elhanan. They're like, who the fuck is this Elhanan guy? This is likely the origin story for David's killing of Goliath. The original story was probably Elhanan killed David. But that hold on, this
killed David?
You mean Goliath?
Sorry, Elhanan killed Goliath. My bad.
Killed Goliath. Yeah. It's you were distracted by Cat.
I was distracted by Cat. Cat was like trying to jump up on me.
Your cat loves you. I'm jealous that you have your cat. So shush and enjoy.
So a good old appropriation story.
Yeah. The thing is, like, the David story engulfed many other stories because they were writing this great national hero. So this was one of the parts that was taken. The original was probably Elhanan killing Goliath. And the thing is, in Chronicles, we get a different version where Elhanan kills Lami, the brother of Goliath. So we have different accounts as to what happened.
It's stolen valor, and I think it's quite amusing how in these battles, obviously a little later in his reign, they make a point of how David doesn't go to war anymore. Because he made his reputation as a young man as this great warrior king. But now, oh, no. Your flatterers say you must not risk yourselves. Surely you are worth more than all of us. Please stay home. And like, I get it. He's probably getting older, and, the role of older warriors is to train and, lead from behind sometimes. But it's especially sus that he didn't even go on this trip where this other guy killed Goliath. It's stolen valor.
Well, Rashi says that Elhanan is David. That's it. That's his answer.
Yeah.
And it's like,
we have like a Eowyn dressing up in the going in dressed as a common soldier sneaking in.
Maybe.
I mean,
he
it's not
doesn't
just
imply that.
It's not just Rashi. There are some modern commentators who say that David and Hanan are the same person, but I'll get to that. I have a comment on this as well.
Very
I thought the disguise version would be more fun.
yeah.
Before I'll start, I see some comments. Aaron?
Is there?
Just trying to get to the mute button. Okay, so Matt White says, Aaron, who was it who originally said, if it can be destroyed by the truth, it deserves to be destroyed by the truth? I can't find the first quote. I tried to Google it too as soon as I saw this comment, and I found a similar quote by Sagan, but that apparently is not his. And there was a novelist who said that it was part of her work, but she didn't remember where she heard it, so it wasn't original for her either. No idea. Sorry about that. I said it. There you go. Matt White says, Lawrence, the Weaver's Beam reference. The Weaver's Beam reference dates the script as a sort of
that sort of loom.
As that sort of loom didn't come out of China until the early Greek era. Yes, no?
Oh, I've absolutely no idea.
That is an interesting point. We should look into that.
Yeah, not entirely sure.
I mean, we've had Weaver.
We've had Weavers
before.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Weaving has been a thing in many forms, but having like a full-sized hefty loom where you've got these massive beams that's obviously very stationary. I don't know though, because again, the weavers and the loom and the threads of fate thing was in Greece a long time before that. I don't know.
I think didn't we also, if I'm remembering properly, I think that they also had evidence of looms that were I don't know exactly how big they were, but they were pretty. I think they were pretty big looms at Deir Allah. I think we have.
Well, I have no doubt that there were ancient looms, but remember, these people started as transitory migrant people moving around in tents. So you're not going to have a loom that's so hefty that it's like impressive that your spear is that big. You would have far more mobile versions, lighter. You'd have to do some things in patches or whatever. But massive looms that could carry heavier and larger materials. I don't know. That's an interesting way to date it, but I do not have the expertise to.
Well, there is some. I mean, if I put it in, there is an AI thing that came up, which I guess is probably condensing some articles, and it says something about like backstrap looms. Ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt would have had them, but raised horizontal looms with treadles wouldn't have come to the Near East from China until like the time of Christ. Yeah, so that's possible what it's talking about, but I don't know. I mean,
if you're going with the Chinese style loom, because other looms existed that were quite substantial, especially when you take this tale.
And the Talmud talks about looms in great detail. So that I mean, that is after the time of Christ technically. But
there were always looms. It's about when there were looms that were big enough for that to be a standard of measurement where you'd go, damn, son.
Maybe, yeah. That's true. To use it as an epithet for like, this is big.
Yeah, exactly. Because those little tiny, like the looms that were made to be disassembled and taken with you on, probably not thicker than his normal spear.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, I think I should start. First, on verse 1, there was famine. It is not stated as to what caused the famine. Bar-Efrat wrote that based on verse 10, many assumed that the famine was caused by lack of rain, though there could be many other reasons, such as diseases or locusts. Tsumura writes that the famine was, quote, an expression of divine wrath against King Saul's violation of the treaty, end quote, though it is unclear as to why God did not punish Saul at the time. He notes that C.H. Gordon calls attention to the fact that, quote, the fitness, physical and moral, and deportment of kings were serious matters, for they were believed to bring on a corresponding state of land and people, end quote. He further writes, quote, according to Malamat and Fensham, the incident is to be taken as a case of punishment for treaty violations in the ancient Near East. Looking at Hittite texts such as the so-called plague prayers of the 14th century, Hittite King Musili II, Malamat identifies, quote, a common doctrine of causality, end quote, in both the Israelite and Hittite literatures, according to which, quote, a national disaster such as famine, plague, etc. might arise from a past violation of a treaty oath. On that same verse, he put the Gibeonites to death. We are not told anywhere else about this event. According to Talmud Yerushalmi Sanhedrin 6:7, this refers to when he killed the priests of Nob, where he killed 7 Gibeonites, 2 woodcutters, 2 water drawers, a scribe, a religious leader, and a beadle. According to Talmud Yevamot 78b, Saul killed the priests of Nob that provided food for the Gibeonites, and consequently, scripture considers it as if he had killed them as well. McCarter notes that some scholars have attempted to connect the oracle directly with the slaughter of the priests of Nob, by distinguishing Nob of 1 Samuel 21:21 with the place referred to in Isaiah 10:32 and Nehemiah 11:32, and identify it instead with the sanctuary in Gibeon. He writes that this hypothesis has not found wide acceptance. He also notes Van der Born's opinion at identifying Gibeah of Judges 19 and 20 with Gibeon, but writes that it is also problematic. He writes instead that the safest, quote-unquote, approach is to assume that the present oracle refers to events not recorded elsewhere in the Bible. He writes, quote, Saul, in his zeal for the people of Israel, in verse 2, tried to exterminate the Gibeonites. His motive for doing so may have been, as Malamat suggests, concern over the security risk represented by the Gibeonite cities, a group of non-Israelite enclaves on Israel's western border. The situation of these cities effectually cut Israel in half, and a Philistine-Gibeonite alliance, such as Cazeles postulates, would have been disastrous for Saul. On verse 2, survivors of the Amorites. The Amorites were the pre-Israelite inhabitants of Canaan, who no longer form an ethno-political entity. Anderson writes that the incorporation of the Gibeonites into Israel may go back to the time of Joshua in chapter 9. Auld writes that terming the Gibeonites as the remnants of the Amorites recalls the report about Solomon's pressing former inhabitants of the land into forced labor, we see in 1 Kings 9:20 and 21. He writes, quote, this link is reinforced when the Gibeonites speak to David about the man who finished them in verse 5. 2 Chronicles 8:8 reports, possibly more originally, that Israel did not finish this remnant, while 1 Kings 9:21 reports that they could not be put to the ban. They could not put them to the ban. End quote. Chazal in Talmud Yevamot 79a wrote that they were not part of the Israelites, meaning that they displayed themselves as cruel, for they were not descendants of Abraham. As Rashi explains, quote, they have proven themselves unworthy to join with Israel, and hence David decreed that they are not permitted to marry into the Jewish community. David said, quote, this nation of Israel has 3 characteristics. The people are merciful, they possess shame, and perform kind deeds for others. Whoever has these 3 characteristics is worth of joining them, end quote.
So the ban, that's herem, right? Herem warfare.
Yeah, herem. Yeah.
Man, I wish Kip was on here for this, because he's talked a lot about that.
Yeah. On that same verse, Saul for his zeal for Israel and Judah. According to Joshua 9, the Gibeonites entered a treaty with Israel, which prevented their destruction. By killing the Gibeonites, Saul has violated the treaty. According to McCarter, Saul's guilt was not the result of shedding blood, but rather shedding blood of a people protected by treaty oaths. Tsumura writes, quote, a king should not do such an unlawful thing against God's will, even in his zeal for the covenant people of God. In other words, his bloody, from bloodshed house, bore blood guilt for this violence. On verse 6, 7 of his male descendants. Although the reading 7 can be understood as literally 7 Saulites, as we see in early translations and Josephus in Antiquity 7:296, some modern commentators take 7 figuratively, as, quote, symbolic of the total figure of the slain Gibeonites, end quote, according to Cazeles, as quoted by Anderson, or that it hints to the treaty, Shvu'ah, which Saul broke, according to Bar-Efrat. Tsumura notes that this goes against the command, "Nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers," in Deuteronomy 24:16, and writes, quote, "Where the 7 accomplices of Saul's act. The text does not suggest that, and furthermore, as David must have been at least in his late teens when Merab married, 1 Samuel 18:19, and was no more than 30 when Saul died, 2 Samuel 5:4, even Merab's oldest son could scarcely have been 10 when Saul died."
Yeah, I mean, following the law, at least as we have it, wasn't always perfect, right? Because they're like, not only are we talking like if it's exilic, then we're talking about like a point in time where people, don't need to follow that law, and if we're talking about like even post exilic, then I think like the law would have maybe some of it. I mean, some of it was a pre exilic, but I think that there were expansions made on the law, and I think that like definitely during the exilic period, where people either don't exactly know the law as it existed at the time very well. I think that times where it's not exactly followed is kind of to be expected. Like we get that in a few places already, and not just in the Deuteronomistic history, but other portions of the text as well. Like there was that even in like Ruth, right? Like there was that stuff about the levirate marriage, but it wasn't quite the same levirate marriage that that the law talks about. So
it's entirely possible that the prohibition on punishing children reflected a later moral, I guess to say, epiphany that came after or during the exilic period. But it's also possible that in this case, there's a case of sort of which law trumps which. If not generally.
Lilith, your microphone is
Oh,
underwater.
sorry. Okay, can you?
It's back to normal now.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Now you're muted though.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry. Okay. What was I saying? I was saying that it's possible that the whole punishing children is or not punishing children for their parents is a later.
It's still underwater. Maybe
Can you hear me now?
No.
Damn
It's a
it.
different microphone, I think.
Ugh, if this changes on me one more frickin' time. How is it now?
I was able to hear the last thing you said just fine.
So this is good.
Well, what it was a moment ago.
Low.
Yeah, it's quieter, but at least it's coming through.
Yeah.
Yay. Okay. All right. Well then, I'll adjust the mic volume manually then.
Okay, you are way quiet. Way quiet. All right, so I'm going to read a comment. Trevor Wright says, how exactly did the interaction between the Israelites and the Gibeonites help to shape the narrative of genocide in Canaan and the relationship to Yahweh despite being Canaanite?
So, when it comes to the first part of the question, it shaped the narrative by just kind of being included in it. They're just part of the people that were slaughtered.
Sorry.
You got to put the phone on silent.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Because what I was going to say before does bear on this a little bit. It could be a case of what law sort of trumps another law. A lot of contracts and arrangements of, may the Lord do more so to me and more also.
Lilith, your microphone was loud.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, Lilith, you don't understand.
Oh my God, that was so loud it blew my asshole out.
It was, Lilith, you were really, really quiet until you weren't.
Yeah. Okay.
The point is,
yes,
you may put secondary laws aside in the case where you're dealing with like a violation of a covenant to a god because oaths were taken may the Lord do so to me and more also if I break this oath that we've made to each other. So you've involved the God in your promise, and thus the consequences for doing so may trump other legal restrictions.
Okay. Well, your sound is clear now. I don't know what you did moments ago, but
I was going to say to second Lawrence when he said that the point was that they would be included, because I read that, or at least I see it that way on verse 3, where it says, David is talking to the Gibeonite leader, what can I do for you? How can I make amends so that you will bless the Lord's inheritance? And I think that's the point he's making there, is so that you could also partake of all this. So let's reconcile. Let's make amends.
It almost reads to me more like, we have been cursed on account of you. Can you take it back and consider your obligations fulfilled if, I give you money or people to kill?
Okay,
yeah, I
I'll
think
continue.
maybe David's
Sorry.
being a good politician too.
Okay, I'll continue on that same verse, on verse 6. To be killed and their bodies exposed. In Hebrew, it's hoka'anum, from the root yud kuf ein. The exact meaning of this verb is unclear. Septuagint, Vulgate, and Targum render hanging or crucifixion, a meaning accepted by traditionals like Rashi, Kimchi, and Gersonides. Peshitta has sacrifice. Likewise, McCarter notes Heller's opinion that Gibeon was a center of sun worship, and that the Saulites were crucified in honor of the sun god. He also notes other opinions, such as exposed with arms and legs broken, according to Kappelrod and Koller, ritual dismemberment, according to Cazalet, or execution by hurling down, according to Robertson Smith. However, he rejects those readings and writes that hanging, quote-unquote, is the most plausible interpretation. He writes, quote, in any case, it is clear that the execution is of a special kind, and that an important part of it is the exposure of the bodies of the dead, end quote. Likewise, Anderson writes, quote, from the context, it is obvious that the bodies were exposed to the elements, and this may have been an aspect of the fate of those who had violated their treaty oath, as elsewhere in the ancient world, end quote.
Yeah. So isn't it interesting, though, that in the end, they end up getting a proper burial instead of being eaten by animals?
It depends on which manuscript you're reading.
Yeah.
Because one of them says it's just Saul and Jonathan, and the other one says Saul and I don't know what word it uses, but Saul and the hanged people, executed or whatever. Yeah.
The victims.
Yeah. I'm not sure what word it is. I guess I just scroll down. See.
Okay, on verse 7, several commentators like McCarter and Anderson suggested that this verse is secondary if 21 verses 1 through 14 stood originally before 9 verses 1 through 13, since in 9:1 David is unaware of Mephibosheth's existence. Tsumura, however, writes that this is unnecessary. On verse 8, Saul's daughter Merab. Hebrew Bible reads Michal, daughter of Saul. This seems incorrect, since according to 623, she did not have a child until the day of her death. Although most early translations preserve the Masoretic text, Targum reads, the 5 sons of Merab, whom Michal, the daughter of Saul, raised. This reading is in line with Chazal's opinion in Talmud Sanhedrin 19b, Genesis Rabbah 80-7, etc., and is supported by traditional commentators. Josephus in Antiquity 789 wrote that Michal bore 5 children in her first marriage. The Lusanic Recension and 2 Hebrew manuscripts, Kennicott 198 and 250, read Merab, daughter of Saul, a reading accepted by modern commentators who take Michal to be a scribal error.
Yeah, I mean it's a good fix to say, these are really the 5. We saw earlier on that Merav had these kids. Michal had these kids, not Merav, and then Merav, adopted them, and that's why it calls them her kids here. It's an obvious mistake or something that happened here, and that's one way of fixing it.
Well, that's a lovely thought. One more thing David can do to Michael. He can, abandon her to take the heat for him and then rip her out of the marriage with the man who actually loves her, and then shame and humiliate her and then lock her away and deny her marital rights and children in his house. But then he could also go and kill her children from the marriage of the man who actually loved her because, treaty reasons.
And
Okay,
yeah, I
sorry.
mean, these executions, you could see them as being legalistic, like, the Saul sinned against us in retribution. You have to kill these things. But we also see at the beginning of the chapter that David asked them about this because of the implication that, that God said this is the reason why you are suffering, why there is a famine. So in a sense, it is a sacrifice of some sort to try and appease God, to bring, to ease off the famine. It doesn't seem to work, though. So
I think it's also really, really important to point out the, again, Middle Eastern manners initial denial thing that happens. Oh, we have no right to take any money or set anyone to death. Oh, no, please, you first. It's very, it's obviously just for the sake of courtesies, you have to say the thing, but you have every intention of.
Okay, sorry.
It looks like human sacrifice. At least we can say that. Yeah.
Okay, on that same verse, Barzillai. We do not know if this is the same Barzillai as in 1727 and 19 verses 31 through 40, although McCarter writes that it is possible. He writes, quote, "The Barzillai who assisted David at Machanaim was a Gileadite from the unidentified town of Rokelim. Adri is also a Gileadite. Specifically, he is a Mecholathite, and the town of Abel Mecholah lay a few miles east of Yabesh Gilead." End quote. Anderson, however, notes Herzberg's rejection of this identification.
Well, I mean, in general, I did want to talk about this since it kind of came up in the comments as well. The Bible is quite notorious for having singular characters, like names, and especially, names that have a meaning referencing that character. Like, we don't see Abraham, Adam, none of the names that are in Genesis for, like, the main characters appear in any of the later writings, pretty much. We get Joshua, I think, again at some point, where there are some names that, like, reappear once in a while, but generally, like, we don't see people using names of their ancestors at all. And that could be because this, that could be like, mythology, fictional writing, whatever. You want to invent a name that tells you about the character just from the name itself. It could be evidence against it being historical, or it could have been an actual practice of the time to not use, like, that. It's very much our thing now to name a child after a relative that's passed away, let's say. And it might not have been a thing at all.
That seems, it would be unusual if there wasn't any naming after relatives or descendants, and also against, like, naming after historical or pseudo historical characters who, to me, it speaks that the mythology that we have now was not even formed properly at the time. Because, I mean, in the Muslim world, how many kids are named Muhammad? Like, half of all males are named Muhammad.
I mean, Jewish people do have biblical names, just like Christians have biblical names. But, like, if you go to, the Talmud and stuff, like, a lot of the names that are in, that are common on, like, Hillel, Gamliel, they're Hebrew, but they're not necessarily, like, old names. Make sense? Like, there are some.
Your name is Isaac, so.
Yeah. Obviously, like, I'm saying nowadays, like, maybe you could say, like, medieval times it became a thing to use biblical names, but I mean, I know, for example, that the practice of names has changed a lot. Like, even in, like, Judaism, like, if you go to, like, England in 1300s, Jews were using English names, and like one of the most common Jewish names at the time was Benedict, because of the, it was a popular name, a Benedict, because of one of the popes. And And then, you want your child to be called Benedict, but he also needs to have a Hebrew name. So actually, the most common Jewish Hebrew name in England in 1300s was Brachial, which is like blessing, blessed as God or whatever, because of Benedict, which means blessing. Rather than Baruch, just Brachial, but which is not a common name today. I only know one person called Brachial. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay, on verse 9, they were put to death during the first days of the harvest, just as the barley harvest was beginning. Bar-Efrat wrote that the harvest time was emphasized here to hint at the connection between the execution of the Solites and the beginning of the harvest. The hope is that by killing the Solites, the famine will end. Anderson writes that this may have been part of some ritual act, since it was performed before Yahweh. On verse 10, Anderson comments, Ritzpah's intention must have been to protect the dead bodies, so that they could be eventually properly buried. For a corpse to be left exposed to the birds and beasts, 1 Samuel 17:44 and 46, Psalms 79:2 and Jeremiah 16:4, was a great dishonor and punishment. Whether such a treatment affected one's form or quality of afterlife remains uncertain. On verse 16, Ishbi Benov. This name is odd, and as is apparent by the early translations, who vary as to its reading. Septuagint reads Yesbi, Vulgate Jebi Benov, Peshita, David, Joab, and Avishai were afraid of a mighty man. According to Rav Yoshua in Talmud Sanhedrin 95a, this was a man, Ish, who came to punish David over the matters of Nob. In the Masoretic text, there's a Ketiv reading Vayishvu, and they settled, and so perhaps the original text read, and they settled at Nob. McCarter, based on Lucianic recension and the misplaced note after verse 11 in the Alexandrinus and Vaticanus, and Dan son of Iowa from the descendants of the giants took them down, amends the text to read, and Dodo son of Joash captured him. Anderson, however, writes that it is far from certain that this reading represents the original text. Tsumura writes that the Ketiv reading, quote, may be reflective of a phonetic reality resulting from a partial assimilation of the semi-vowel I to U in the context where the bilabial consonant B appears both in the preceding and the subsequent positions.
Bilabial.
Yeah.
Using both lips.
Yeah.
Bilabial.
Yeah. On verse 17, the lamp of Israel. This expression appears only here in the Hebrew Bible. Abravanel writes, the king is the lamp of God, and he is the one who brightens the land and its inhabitants. Anderson writes that the lamp metaphor may be based on the continually burning lamp in the temple, according to Exodus 27:20, or in a figurative sense, as a symbol of life, Job 21:17, Proverbs 20:20, and 24:20. Tsumura notes D.G. Firth's observation, quote, the lamp symbolism is important for the Davidic monarchy, as we see in 1 Kings 11:36, 15:4, and 2 Kings 8:19. On verse 18, Gob. This place is only mentioned here and in verse 19. According to 1 Chronicles 24, they fought at Gezel, a reading attested in the Lucianic recension. Likewise, Kimchi and Abravanel wrote that Gezel and Gob were two names for the same place, and McCarter amended the text to Gezel based on 1 Chronicles. Anderson notes Stolz's opinion that Gob is Gibethon, appearing in Joshua 19:44, perhaps west of Gezel. He writes, however, that the authenticity of the reading itself is questionable. Tsumura notes that Naaman identifies Khirbet Keyafa on the northern side of the valley of Elah as the biblical Gob. He writes that if this identification is correct, this would support the antiquity of David's story, since the city was already destroyed in the early 9th century. Septuagint and Peshitta read Gat, and Josephus in Antiquity 7:301 reads Gazara. On verse 19, according to this verse, a different person named Elchanan, son of Ya'arei Orgim, killed Goliath. The Jewish tradition, found in Targum, Ruth Rabbah 2:2, Rashi, and Kara, identifies Elchanan with David, reading Ya'arei Orgim as Yari, whose family were weavers, taking Jesse to be Yari. Likewise, Anderson notes Honeyman's opinion that David was the king's throne name, while Elchanan was his personal name. This, however, it contradicts what he said in verse 17, where the men urged David to not go to battle anymore. Moreover, McCarter wrote that it is no longer possible to argue that David was a title. He writes, quote, "Deeds of obscure heroes tend to attach themselves to famous heroes, and there is no doubt that the tradition attributing the slaying of Goliath to Elchanan is older than that which credits the deeds to David," end quote. Likewise, Auld writes, quote, "A note in BTH about an individual victory over a Philistine giant has been reattributed to David as his legend developed, and the end result is the famous story we earlier read," end quote. Anderson, however, notes Herzberg's opinion that Goliath may have come to designate a type, and that of Kirkpatrick that there may have been two giants who were called Goliath. This view is shared by Tsumura, who writes, quote, "It is possible that the name and its variants became a common name used by the Israelites to refer to a Philistine giant, just as the descendants of Rapha means the descendants of a giant," verses 16 and 18, end quote.
Don't you guys think that if Elkanah was like the personal name, like one hypothesis affirms, that there would have been some sort of mention of this name changing thing, like it did for Abraham and others?
Yeah, that does happen quite often, and they usually do emphasize the name change. Although, like, I could understand the argument of like Goliath just being kind of like this type, right? But the thing is, like, you have the same description of the weapon. You have this Goliath coming from so even though the other one was from Gath, like the Gittite, I think Gath was like a town of the Gittites, right? Wasn't it?
Well, and there could have been some
properly.
There could have been some revision of the story in the expanded edition made for David that tried to align it with some known or commonly understood battle that Saul engaged in, because that is the premise of the story. It's the built out version that is obviously
sure, yeah, and they were from Rafa and all that giants. So I don't know. To me, it just seems way more likely that that the Elhanan killing Goliath story was the original one.
Oh, definitely.
That was taken for David.
Now, I also find it interesting that Elkanah means God was gracious, but it's El. So is this maybe a Canaanite tradition?
So El did at some point become a generic name for God. So like, yeah, while in Canaan it was used for the high God, at some point, like in Israelite tradition, they started using it as a more generic name for God, and then they kind of all got engulfed under the big banner of Yahweh and Adonai and
Well,
so
it was El, the greater God that was Yahweh was one of his sons, I think, and there's a lot of convoluted mythology, but yeah, totally. The name El, it had at one point referred to a specific god, and by now it's just sort of God.
Yeah.
And finally, on verse 20, a huge man. In Hebrew, it's Ish Madon. The word Madon means strife, contention, or quarreling, according to Gersonides, BDB Dictionary, and Halot, but is also rendered as Madon by Vaticanus. The word Madon in the Masoretic text is in Kerei, but Ketiv has Midian, possibly reflecting Midian, according to Septuagint, or the plural of Mad, i.e. measure, according to Bar-Efrat. Similarly, 1 Chronicles 26 reads Ish Midah, which is generally rendered a man of great measures. This meaning is attested in Targum, Peshitta, Vulgate, followed by most traditional and modern commentators.
A man of great measure. Is that the golfer Palmer?
Oh, I was thinking you were going on a different approach.
Okay, so I got a couple comments. Trevor and Wright, I'm going to read both of his comments together. Would you agree or disagree of the war against the Philistines in 2 Samuel 21, verse 15 is historical? And if not, does it fit in the overall context and takeaway of the story? In terms of storytelling, what implications does the war against the Philistines have for completing the narrative of the rest of the story in 2 Samuel 21?
Well, no, it wouldn't be historical. There were probably plenty of like scuffles with the Philistines, but under the banner of like David's army, no, probably not.
Yeah.
Is by this time in the chronology the Philistines a thing, or is it still off, where they haven't yet arrived in those lands?
Oh no, they were definitely there. They were like their neighbors. So like the Philistines had like 5 primary cities, like Gath, Ashkelon, and a few others. And the thing is, we know even from like other inscriptions, like extra biblical ones, that those cities were often like put together. Like there was this kind of like this vase, I guess, that had like the names of these cities put on the sides of it, like right around the rim. So like they were definitely like, you know, in some sort of league, right? So so we have like extra biblical attestation of like these states being their own thing, or these cities being like their own, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, loose nation state, or loose city state, I don't know. But at this point in time, even in the narrative, we also have them being their own group.
Okay, so I have only one Christian, and that is Jerome, and I'll quote him directly. This is from Against Jovinianus in 233. He writes, "The Gibeonites met the children of Israel, and although other nations were slaughtered, they were kept for hewers of wood and drawers of water. And of such value were they in God's eyes that the family of Saul was destroyed for the wrong done to them. Where would you put them? Among the goats? But they were not slain, and they were avenged by the determination of God. Among the sheep? But Holy Scripture says they were not of the same merit as the Israelites. You see then that they do indeed stand on the right hand, but are of a far inferior grade."
Ugh. Oh, do love me some racism.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm done.
No. It's appropriate that the Christian comes in with the last minute racism. I mean, really, where would the history of Christianity be without it? Not that it doesn't follow naturally from the text in many cases, because it really does. But you know, commonalities.
Just the end of the chapter. What do we think of the apologetic that, you know, the whole thing with Elchanan or David killing Goliath? That this is just another guy from that town who was a giant with that name.
I mean,
I think it's all cope.
I mean, there are some scholars who say take this approach like Tsumura. So.
I mean, it's an easy answer. I'm saying in the context of the Bible, does it make sense to you?
Copium. Come on. How much of the commentary that we've read in this series over the past several years has been heavy copium?
Right. Obviously.
I mean, I didn't read enough material to reach a conclusion towards this. I just noted some of the diverging opinions.
I mean,
regarding
if
this.
you're coming with the preconception that this is literal history, then the idea that there is another person with the same name doesn't feel unheard of, I guess. And I guess if we're coming from the preconception that this is not literal history, then the idea of someone with exact same name and description being brought up in the same storyline as another person.
And not only that, but it's verbatim. Like it's the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Verbatim.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Also, yeah. It's like the description is verbatim.
Yeah.
It's not just the name, the place.
But that's how you tell plagiarism. I mean, screw preconceptions. that's how you tell plagiarism. You Google the text and see if they copied huge chunks out.
Right, and even if
like everything James Somerton has ever done.
Yeah.
Like if this was you would think that the authors would have put in something to say that this is a different person, right? They would have put in Goliath, the son of blah blah blah, to differentiate him.
If a college professor coming at it without the assumption that you stole your paper still concludes that you stole your paper, you got a problem. So I don't know. For me, it falls under that.
Let's not forget also that the claim here is that there was a giant. And I don't know, forgive my ignorance, but is there any evidence, like archaeological evidence of humans ever being like?
I mean,
there's Shaquille O'Neal.
That's physical. That's physical or physics. How would you? What's the adjective?
A race of giants? No, they didn't have that. There were some tall people sometimes, but there was not a race of giants.
I'm just saying, if Shaq has kids, those mofos are gonna be huge. And let's just agree that in that day, if Shaq walked into the ancient Israel where people were probably 5 foot nothing, Tom Cruise height, or lower, it would be like, oh my god, a giant.
I think we have evidence of someone who's almost 9 feet tall, but like they were very sick. They needed help to walk, and they died young. So
you're talking about the wrong thing.
Warrior.
Think about this: the tallest people, some of the tallest people in the world. I don't know if it was the supposed Zulus supposedly had this average height thing back in the 60s, but currently it's Norwegians. And I think
Dutch,
the Dutch, or the tallest people in Europe anyway. And so, and this is average,
like 6 foot something.
I've noted originally in First Samuel, the story of Goliath, that there are claims of a giant called John Middleton who lived during the 16th century, who was about 9 feet 3 inches or 2.82 meters.
We have to recognize that people who were absurdly tall like that, they were not warriors. They would have had massive health problems and died young. They would not have been able to lift your giant ass bronze spear. You need someone of fit body who is unusually tall for the area. 9 feet is an exaggeration that grew like a big fish story. But honestly, any of you guys would be too tall in that day.
I heard William Wallace is 7 feet tall and shoots lightning bolts from his arse.
Impressive. I think the tallest confirmed person was Robert Wadlow, right?
Yeah,
8'2", I think.
One, the 8'11".
No, he was 8'11". Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty sure.
Yeah. He needed a walking stick just to constantly. And he died like 20
in his 20s.
22
something. 22,
yeah, crazy.
Wow. Yeah. So anyone who thinks that believes in biblical giants should look up the what's it called, the cube law, something.
Square cube law.
Yeah, square cube law. More or less, if you.
Oh no! Oh my god, we just brought up math things.
Oh no!
Oh no! Tomer's gonna get an erection or something.
No, don't worry. That's physics. That's not my department.
Yeah. Look up. Yeah, it's more physics, but look up the square cube law. More or less, if something increases in height and width by double, its volume is increased by a cube. So
yeah, that's why we can't. Times. That's why we don't get. I'm gonna steal this quote from Aaron. Yeah. That's why we don't get dogs as big as Texas. I also liked Gutsick Gibbons' response to that. Like, well, first of all, what would they eat? And then Ken Hovind was like, well, that's a good point. Like, he never thought about it.
What, giants?
Pigs the size of Texas. It's a Kent Hovind thing because the bounds of reality don't exist if I'm arguing against evolution, which I don't understand anyway.
Okay, I thought he was talking about giants because we do have in Joshua where the spies bring back, giant fruit. So.
In fairness, agriculture hadn't gone that far in those days. Like, even in the days of the Roman Empire, peaches were like sour cherries with giant pits. So, giant fruit could just be...
The Israelites were actually borrowers, and the Egyptians were using them to Tiny little permits.
I think we should move on. What do you think?
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
All right, so we ready for the next chapter then?
Yeah.
All right.
Read through 25.
Okay. David spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day when the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. He said, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer, my God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold and my refuge." You said that already. "My Savior, you save me from violence. I call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised, and I am saved from my enemies. For the waves of death encompassed me, and the torrents of perdition assailed me. The cords of Sheol entangled me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I called upon the Lord. To my God I called. From his temple he heard my voice, and my cry came to his ears. Then the earth reeled and rocked. The foundations of the heavens trembled and reeled because he was angry. Smoke went up from his nostrils and devouring fire from his mouth. Glowing coals flamed forth from him. He bowed the heavens and came down. Thick darkness was under his feet. He rode on a cherub and flew. He was seen upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness around him a canopy. Thick clouds, a gathering of water out of the brightness before him. Coals of fire flamed forth. The Lord thundered from heaven. The Most High uttered his voice. He sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning and routed them. And then the channels of the sea were seen. The foundations of the world were laid bare. At the rebuke of the Lord, at the blast of the breath of his nostrils. He reached from on high. He took me. He drew me out of mighty waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy, from those who hated me. And they were too mighty for me. They came upon me in my day of calamity. But the Lord was my stay. He brought me out into a broad place. He delivered me because he delighted in me. The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness, if I do say so myself. According to the cleanliness of my hands, because I'm ever so great. He recompensed me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord. I am so much more holier than thou. And have not wickedly departed from my God. For all his ordinances were before me, and from his statutes I did not turn aside. I was blameless before him. I did nothing wrong, and I kept myself from guilt. Therefore, the Lord has recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to my cleanliness in his sight. With the loyal, you show yourself loyal. With the blameless, you show yourself blameless. With the pure, you show yourself pure. And with the crooked, you show yourself shrewd. You deliver a humble people, but your eyes are upon a haughty. Your eyes are upon the haughty to bring them down.
Aaron, I think he doesn't hear us.
I also don't think he hears us.
No.
I didn't. I honestly did not hear you.
I said until 25.
I'm sorry. I was just kind of getting into it.
Yeah, you were getting into it. Yeah.
I appreciate it, though. Your reading is so much more interesting because, God, I find the Psalms boring. Just the reading through the Bible as a kid, the law didn't defeat me. The genocides didn't defeat me. The fucking Psalms were what stopped me. It's boring as hell listening to someone kiss God's ass in triplicate.
I get that. In fact, because they were so boring, that's what, because once we got to them on Atheist Sunday School, we were like, you know what? We're going to spend half a year in the Psalms. And
no, dear God, please, no.
Listen, I was saying this because we outlined the whole thing beforehand, and we were going to spend 25 weeks in Psalms. So we were like, you know what, we need something a bit more interesting. So we started our apocryphal show, and I think we started that with First Enoch. But anyways, yeah. So I have quite a few things to say about this. So like I said, this is going to be kind of one of the topics for my capstone paper. And there are a few things that we should talk about. And I did go over some of this in my biblical flat Earth video. But I will talk about a few more things. So, firstly, from let's see, verses 5 and 6. Yeah, so the waves of death encompassed me, the torrents of perdition assailed me, all that stuff. So he's talking about God saving him, and he's talking here about how he was near. This would be near death. Nothing in this text suggests that he died. But it
was only a near-death experience.
Yeah, it would have been a near-death experience, and
he was only mostly dead.
Yeah, the reason why this is significant is so have you guys read if you guys read Jonah, a lot of people think that Jonah died, and then that was supposed to be like the sign of Jonah, right? His resurrection and all that stuff. But the thing is, the language that's used is very, very similar. The waves of death encompassed them. The cords of Sheol entangled them. This cat needs to fuck off. So the thing is, in Jonah, just as it is here, he is not. David is not dead. He's just near death. So I'll bring that up again once we get to Jonah. And then I think so in verse 7, when he calls to God for help, it says here, from his temple, so from God's temple, he heard David's voice. That's important, because if God is in his temple, this would be his heavenly temple, his heavenly throne. And the reason we know that is because of the stuff that follows afterwards. This is a theophany. This is an appearance of a deity. And let's take a look at some of these things. So yeah, the earth reeled and rocked. Smoke went from his nostrils, devouring fire, glowing coals. Then it says specifically in verse 10, he bowed the heavens and came down, which means that his heavenly throne, his temple, is in heaven. This is so similar to Canaanite and other ancient Near Eastern cosmology and their cosmic geography. That we know that the same idea applied to Yahweh, that he had this temple in the heavens, and in order to get to David, he had to essentially rip open the fucking canopy and make his way down. Now, the part that I will be concentrating on for my paper, especially, is in it's verses 10 through 12. So yeah, he bowed the heavens and came down. So from his heavenly temple, he came down. And then where it says thick darkness was under his feet. So he rode on a cherub and flew. He was seen upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness around him a canopy, thick clouds, a gathering of water. So the reason this is significant is because there are other ancient Near Eastern texts that talk about this region of darkness between the entryway to the heavens and the earth. So this happens in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where we have Gilgamesh traveling to the ends of the earth, and on his journey, one of the places he goes through is just a region of darkness. And I'm currently checking some, other mythologies for this kind of motif. But it seems like there was a region of darkness between heaven and earth. And we actually kind of get evidence of this, and this is the other part of my paper in Job 26:7, where God stretches out Zaphon, and he stretched it out over the void, and had it hanging over emptiness or something like that. I forget the exact verse. But in Job 26:7, we also get that. Because in my view, I'll explain why. I'll get to it. You gotta follow me on this one. So this region of darkness, just keep that in mind. Now I did note earlier that this was the exact same psalm that's it's Psalm 18. They're synonymous, except for one thing. So I don't know why. I had Psalm 18 open, but then I don't know why I closed it. I had to compare it. So they are exactly the same except for one verse. So it says in verse 8 here, so the earth reeled and rocked, the foundations of heaven trembled. Keep that in mind, the foundations of heaven trembled. But in Psalm 18:7, the earth reeled and rocked, the foundations of the mountains trembled. So there is a replacement of heavens and mountains, and this has been this was suggested first by I forget his full name, but Anderson, I think, and he wrote this paper where he was like, well, what if Zaphon, like it used to be, Zaphon is the name of the Canaanite cosmic mountain, so that's like where Baal and El would have lived. That's where
essentially Canaanite Olympus.
Yes, it's Canaanite Olympus.
It's not the same as Mount Hermon, right?
No, it's a different one, but it's the same idea though.
Because that's like the north. It is to the north of Israel, and the north in Hebrew is Zaphon as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's which is also important, because eventually Zaphon just came to just like sometimes they use it to just mean north, right? And we know that because sometimes they have it paralleled with south. But other times we're just talking about Zaphon, like in Job 26:7. So it wouldn't, to me, and to basically like to a whole bunch of fucking commentators, it doesn't make much sense to stretch out the north over the void. But it does make sense if we consider the context of Zaphon at some point, the specific name for the cosmic mountain. That was, the Canaanite cosmic mountain. Eventually, just became a term for heaven. So this transference of mountains in Psalm 18 for heaven in 2 Samuel kind of seems to me to share that same core, where you have mountain, because it eventually came to just represent the heavens overall, just being replaced with the word heaven in 2 Samuel because of that later understanding. So that's going to be the core of my paper, essentially. Are you guys following me on this one?
Yeah, so you're saying the foundations of the mountain is older than foundations of the heaven?
Yes.
That would actually make sense. I mean, think about it. It's the natural progression of gods. We can't see the gods. They live in the mountain. Then we move to the mountains, so they move to the sky. Then we move to the sky, and they fuck off into another realm of existence. It's, that's how it goes.
Yeah, I would say that verse 10 JPS translates it as he bent the sky and came down.
Yes, exactly.
Cloud beneath his feet. But also translations, Arafel is also translated as fog. So cloud, fog, darkness. And then the next few bits, I mean, it's very much giving storm imagery, right? We've got darkness, clouds, thunderstorms, thunderheads. Whatever that means.
It's a theophany. It's exactly that. It shows up all across the Bible. Yeah.
Bolts.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that the inclusion of darkness for this also points to that cosmological background of there being this region of darkness. So it also, among other cosmological motifs, it also shares this region of darkness with the rest of the ancient Near East.
Right. I mean, if you believe that above the sky is water, and that's why it's blue,
Right.
then why is it dark at night? So there must be like a physical darkness that comes and fills up the void.
Keep in mind the sun's got to find a place to hide at night.
Yeah, true.
Well,
yeah.
and they did regard darkness as almost a physical thing that you could, like God was sitting there separating the light from darkness, going, light, dark, light, dark, light, like chunks.
Right. First day, separate light from dark. It's like these physical things, nothing to do with the sun. The sun isn't involved until the third day.
No,
fourth
it's
day.
just magic light and dark chunks.
And so like God's light is lighting up the world, but somehow the day cycle is related to that holy light, and the sun is just like, I'm just gonna hang out during the day because
God is the sun, but also not.
And like some people still think to this day that the moon has got something to do with the night, and it's not true. The moon is up during the day just as much as it is during the night. So the idea that the sun rules the day and the moon rules the night, it time-wise anyway, isn't true.
No, not at all. But it is far more visible when it is out at night.
Yeah, it's definitely more important during the night.
Yeah. So my hypothesis is that the psalm is older than this, and it only changed because at the point of time that 2 Samuel's being written, we already have the replacement of or the merging, I guess, of meanings, where mountains, and specifically Safon, would just come to mean heavens overall. So you kind of remove it from that mountain context, and it just kind of is the word that can be used for heaven sometimes. I'm going to talk about some other hypotheses because most of my paper is just about Job 26:7, but I'm definitely using this as part of it because I think it's really critical. Hopefully that made sense to everyone, but that is the bulk of my commentary so far.
Got another comment from Trevor Wright, who says some Christians believed in the concept of the greater Israel, and in the Bible, the Christian's map depicts Israel with a size greater than the state of Israel.
Yeah.
Why do they believe this?
Because it's fulfilling a biblical prophecy.
Yeah, I mean the Bible has multiple different like borders that you can are like, so some are like supposed to be like David conquered all the way to to the Euphrates maybe or whatever, and then there are other bits that are more what's the word, prophetic.
Ezekiel especially.
Yeah. So the idea of like the river of Egypt to the Euphrates and whatever, like that being the original size of Israel under David, or a messianic prophecy, it's biblical, so that's why they use it.
It's the idea that God has promised all this land and whatever land they decide, whichever borders they decide to use, and then they have to go make it happen.
Yeah, just like God will win them a battle once they kill everybody on the other side.
Yeah, it's really nice of him.
Yeah.
So helpful.
Luke Riley offers £2 and says, nice study of Samuel.
I just want to say real quick that I never met one Israeli who actually believes in Greater Israel. I think it's just most Israelis understand that this is nonsense.
I think
they don't support it. Only the extremes support.
Yeah, but that's more of it's seen as a messianic thing rather than
it is a messianic
than
thing.
A political thing, right? So like the religious Jews will be like, this is God has blessed this land, and like when Messiah comes, he'll be king. We will have a king, a monarchy, and this will be the land, the borders of the land, and blah blah blah. Like, they're not, and that they're not. Then they wouldn't support. They don't like the secular state, so they wouldn't support the secular state trying to.
Oh no shit! They don't like it. I mean the Haredi especially.
Yeah,
but
I mean they current governments they're okay with.
No.
Well, the more fundamentalist evangelical Christians are trying to force the political state into this promised land that they've outlined, because that way they get the apocalypse, and then we all die or convert. I think the Jews are given a chance to convert, which is very nice. And then everybody else dies and goes to hell forever. And they get to be like, I told you so forever.
Yeah. Well, they still need to find Gog and Magog. So
yeah, but
Yeah.
what I'm saying, they would withstand significant torture rather than convert. Because I know because I saw the Mel Brooks movie.
Yeah.
Well, that was a thing, Aaron. That was always a thing.
I think that is a thing. People who are, religious-minded minorities, like being persecuted and not giving up their faith, like that is a thing that happened. Not always. I mean, see the Spanish Inquisition.
There's a fetishization of those who are willing to, and it is a part of our psychology. If someone just attacks what you believe or your identity blindly, you will defend it instinctively without thought. It's just a defense mechanism. So people will then, but then, groups, lots of groups, Jehovah's Witnesses, more modern groups, older groups have used the idea that if they persecute us, it means we're right.
Yeah.
Which is a good way to shut down any criticism, however valid and factually justified.
And remember, the Holy Spirit is only testing you.
And also groupthink can affect you in that in a destructive way that can make you,
Absolutely. And then you have the everlasting promise that in the end, God and Jesus and the Messiah or whatever is going to come down and tell everyone else that ever was rude to you or cruel that you were right all along, and then is going to make them suffer. And you're going to sit there in your palace of self-righteousness for all of eternity, being happy.
I mean,
with how right you were.
If the threat is not like, convert or die, if it's like, we will torture and burn you and convert you, and and you have the choice to take your own lives in a more painless way, then that is more logical to act in that way, in a sense. So it's not really it's not proof of anything that people had chose to do that in history.
No. And it's there's a lot of intricate psychological things, but I think the most obnoxious form is the kind you get in America now with like people who've never suffered any persecution in their life, and they're taught to act more and more obnoxious so that eventually someone will tell them to fuck off because they're being an asshole. And then they'll be like, see, you're persecuting me. That's my proof that I'm right, and God will vindicate me and you'll burn in hell. Lovely people.
Everybody's God is big on vengeance, aren't they?
Yeah. He'll get to it. Really, he will.
All right, are we ready to continue?
I have comments.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is going to be interesting, actually.
I mean, it's like the comments aren't that long. I've managed to get like 6 pages out of it. I mean, yeah. So I didn't really expound on it that much. So I'll start on verse 1, which is the hand of Saul. Rashi comments, wasn't Saul part of the general grouping of his enemies? Instead, he was his greatest enemy and pursuer, end quote. Anderson notes the Hood's translation of Shaul as Sheol. He writes that this is possible since Saul is already included among the enemies, while the deliverance from Sheol is implied in verse 6. He writes, however, that the usual rendering is equally possible. On verse 2,
Lucky seems to just say this is a usage in language where you put a list and then you put the one who is the most important at the end and you name him, and then he gives some examples. For example, like he loved all of these women and this woman, right? This woman is also part of that list, but she's the most loved. So you name her like that. It's just a normal thing in the Bible to do, or Hebrew to do, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, on verse 2, the Lord is my rock. Similar descriptions of Yahweh as a rock appear in 23:3, Isaiah 30:29, as well as in names such as Tsuriel, El is my crag in Numbers 3:35, and Tsuri Shaddai, Shaddai is my crag, according to Numbers 1:6. McCarter quotes from Albright, quote, many of the most important Anatolian and Northwest Semitic deities of the 2nd millennium BC were deified mountains. a fact which explains why Tsur, mountain, appears so often in such an archaic poem as Deuteronomy 32 in the meaning God, capital G God, as well as why it has the same sense in several Hebrew personal names of the Mosaic period. On verse 5.
The Mosaic period?
Yeah.
The part that we patched together, bits, put all the
That's
bits
all
together
bright.
and
What
made
did you
it into
expect?
I'm saying because mosaic also means like, picture made of little stones.
Okay. On verse 5, destruction. In Hebrew, Belial. The word is used to describe evil or wicked people. In Hebrew, Bnei Belial, literally sons of Belial. Thus, Targum reads, a company of sinners. Kimchi writes that David said Belial to every evil person among his enemies, or that Belial was the name of the wicked person. Gersonides renders rivers of evil and writes that they represent all the great evils. McCarter renders hell based on parallels between Mot, death, and Sheol, or Mavet. Septuagint reads, wadis of lawlessness. Vulgate, the floods of Belial. Peshitta, the foot soldiers of the wicked. And Anderson renders, deadly trouble.
Can you translate the word literally, like Bli Ya'al, like without restraint or something like that? I don't know what it might mean.
There are some. I've talked about this word previously.
Yeah, because like Steinsaltz seems to translate it as unbridled or uncontrollable. Does that make sense?
I think that's Rashi's interpretation of the word from reading bli and all, without yoke.
I don't think he says that.
He said that in Deuteronomy.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see.
Yeah,
maybe.
Because the name appears in other places in the Bible.
Okay, so it's most likely that it's an older, like maybe a god or something.
I guess I think I've expounded on this more when we talked about it in Deuteronomy.
Cool.
Though I can't recall what chapter exactly. I think Deuteronomy 13:14 maybe. I don't know. Okay. On verse 8, the foundations of the heavens. In Hebrew, Mosdot HaShamayim. Bar-Efrat writes that these were the pillars on which the heavens were leaning on, according to the ancients' viewpoint. Psalms 18:8, which is 7 in the Old Testament, reads, the foundations of the mountains, a reading attested in the Vulgate and Peshitta. This reading is favored by Gersonides and Abravanel, since the mountains are high, and as such are described as heavens. McCarter also favors this reading, but most commentators retain the Masoretic text. On verse 9, in this verse, Yahweh is depicted, quote, as if he were the fire-breathing Leviathan, Job 41:18-21, end quote, according to Anderson. McCarter notes that elsewhere, Yahweh vents his wrath by breathing fire, as we see in Isaiah 66:15, Ezekiel 21:36, which is 31 in the Old Testament, and 22:31, etc. And smoke, according to Deuteronomy 29:19, which is 20 in the Old Testament, Isaiah 65:5, Psalms 74:1. He writes that in verses 13 forward, quote, the fiery language becomes part of the larger thunderstorm imagery that pervades this section of the poem, end quote. Likewise, Tsumura writes that the imagery is probably that of a thunderstorm.
And here once again, Rush claims that angry people have smoke coming out of their nostrils.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what that says about like medieval southern France like diet, but like what was going on? Like why people had smoke coming out of their nostrils when they got angry, but whatever.
Yeah.
No, these are just common theophoric theophonic elements.
Yeah, but the way he says it is like, such is the manner of an angry person. Smoke comes out of their nostrils.
I think I've noted this in Exodus, that Chacham's interpretation of this Amos Chacham, that the smoke, quote unquote, is the air. Like if you're angry, you're puffing.
Right. Oh, okay. I mean, he does quote Isaiah, so maybe he's saying this is, he's saying according to the biblical literature, this is what it means. Maybe he doesn't necessarily mean it literally. Yeah.
Okay, on verse 11, he mounted the cherubim and flew. Anderson comments, the cherubim were thought to be winged creatures, as was in Exodus 25:20, 1 Kings 6:24, Ezekiel 10:8, and they are sometimes envisaged as composite figures, having a human face and animal body. or any other variations, according to Ezekiel 10:20, 41 verses 18 and 19. They could serve as Yahweh's throne or as bearers of it, Psalms 82, which is 1 in the Old Testament, and 99:1, and also as a means of transport, quote-unquote. On verse 12, the dark rain clouds. In Hebrew, it's chashrat maim. The word chashrat is found only here and in the parallel in Psalms 18:12. Rabbi Yehoshua in Talmud Ta'anit 9b rendered it as sieve and said, quote, "The clouds grow stronger and rise to the firmament and open their mouths like a leather bottle and receive the rainwaters from above. And the clouds are perforated like a sieve, and they come and sprinkle water onto the ground." End quote. Likewise, Rashi reads, quote, "This denotes a sieve. The water falls to the earth in small droplets." End quote. McCarter writes that this reading is confirmed by the Ugaritic noun cheter, meaning sieve. Another interpretation is based on Arabic, where chatara means dense or solid. Thus, Bar-Efrat writes that this refers to dense clouds, in parallel with huge thunderstorms, in Hebrew avei shchakim. McCarter writes that in any case, quote, "This cosmic structure is the celestial rain clouds," end quote. On verse
so the gods are dumping water down on us through a sieve, because if they didn't, it wouldn't come down and drop.
You're on the water again.
Flash.
Yeah.
Sorry. So the water has to go through a sieve, or it'll just hit our head like a bucket splash?
You could say that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
I mean, it seems that this is like maybe an unrelated like poem or psalm that was like ended here after the whole story with the famine, as saying like, oh, and then David, blessed God for giving them rain, but I don't know, it seems a bit,
Okay. On verse 14, Elyon. McCarter writes that Elyon designates, quote, "the most high of the gods, to whom all the gods, Yahweh included originally, were subordinate," seen in Psalms 82:6, was identified by the Israelites with their God, and Elyon, quote-unquote, has become an epithet of Yahweh in the biblical literature, as we see in Psalms 7:18, which is 17 in the Old Testament, and 47:3, which is 2 in the Old Testament, end quote. Likewise, Anderson writes that Elyon may have been originally associated with the cult of El in the pre-Israelite Jerusalem, as we see in Genesis 14, verses 18 through 24. On verse 16, the valleys of the sea, in Hebrew, afikei yam. The word afik has the Ugaritic cognate apek, with apek thamtam, or thamatam, referring to channels of the double deep, according to patterns cited by McCarter. According to Halot, afik refers to, quote, "the deepest part of a valley flowing with water, stream bed," end quote. Likewise, Gersonides and Bar-Efrat render "the bottom of the sea." Anderson writes that this can also be reminiscent of the crossing of the Red Sea. McCarter argues that in the Ugaritic passages, the verb refers to opening a tent flap, and not to exposing the bottom of the sea. Kimchi takes afikim as, quote, "the water which is flowing by force." On that same verse, the foundations of the earth laid bare. In Hebrew, mosdot tevel. Rashi comments, "When the Red Sea split, all the world's waters split as well," end quote. Bar-Efrat wrote that this refers to the notion that the world was established upon the waters. Bar-Efrat also wrote that this reflects... I copied it twice. In Psalms 24, verses 1 and 2. McCarter notes that Patton compared Mostei Aretz in Psalms 82:5 and Misadat Aras in Ugaritic, both denoting the foundations of the earth. On verse 17, Anderson comments, "The purpose of the actions in the preceding verses was to prepare the way for the psalmist's deliverance from the destructive forces. It is just possible that the rare verb masha, to draw out, may have been intended as a pointer to the Mosaic story, Exodus 2:10. However, it is doubtful that the psalmist meant to present himself as a second Moses, according to Liderboss, since Exodus 2 stresses divine providence, while our psalm speaks of direct divine intervention. On verse 20, a spacious place, in Hebrew, merchav. McCarter writes that the word refers to, quote, a broad space with plenty of room, end quote, as we see in most early translations. And in this verse, it refers to, quote, Yahweh's rescue of the psalmist from his tight predicament, end quote. He notes Dahoud and Trump's opinion that Hamerchav is a designation of the netherworld, and translate, quote, he brought me out of the broad domain, end quote. He writes, however, that this reading is in contrast with the reading of Merchav in Habakkuk 1:6, where it refers to the Babylonians' march abroad, quote-unquote, to capture lands not rightfully theirs, and in Hosea 4:16, where Yahweh is said to shepherd Israel like a lamb in the open, i.e., in a wide pasture. Likewise, Tsumura writes that Hamerchav is an idiom meaning to be greatly distressed, and the reading of netherworld is unnecessary and doesn't fit the context. And finally, verses 21 through 25, McCarter comments, in these verses, the psalmist boasts of his innocence and purity. Notice the repetition in verses 21 and 25. This forms a chiastic inclusion and marks off the section as a compositional unit within the poem. I am inclined, moreover, to agree with the earlier literary critics like Dom, Briggs, and Segal, and recently Viola in regarding verses 21 through 25, or at least verses 22 to 25, as an expansion. There is distinctive Deuteronomistic language here. To keep the ways of Yahweh, Shamar Dachei Yehovah, in verse 22, compare Judges 2:22, reading Dachei for Masoretic text Derech with Targum, and for the ways of Yahweh, see Deuteronomy 8:6, 10:12, 11:22, 19:9, etc. The judgments and statutes of verse 23 are among the most familiar of Deuteronomistic cliches. Yeah, that's it.
Are we ready to continue then?
Yes, please finish it.
All right, I think I was on 25.
26.
26. All right. With the loyal, you show yourself loyal. With the blameless, you show yourself blameless. With the pure, you show yourself pure. And with the crooked, you show yourself shrewd. You deliver a humble people, but your eyes are upon the haughty to bring them down. Indeed, you are my lamp, O Lord. The Lord lightens my darkness. By you, I can outrun a troop, and by my God, I can leap over a wall. This God, his way is perfect. The promise of the Lord proves true. He is a shield for all who take refuge in him. For who is God but the Lord? And who is a rock except our God? The God who has girded me with strength, has opened my wide path. He made my feet like the feet of a deer, and he set me secure on the heights. He trained my hands for war, so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. You have given me the shield of your salvation, and your help has made me great. You have made me stride freely, and my feet do not slip. I pursued my enemies and destroyed them, and did not turn back until they were consumed. I consumed them. I struck them down so that they did not rise. They fell under my feet, for you girded me with strength for the battle. You made my assailants sink under me. You made my enemies turn their backs to me, those who hated me, and I destroyed them. They looked, but there was no one to save them. They cried to the Lord, but he did not answer them. I beat them fine like the dust of the earth. I crushed them and stamped them down like the mire of the streets. You delivered me from strife with the peoples. You kept me as the head of the nations. People whom I had not known served me. Foreigners came cringing to me. As soon as they heard of me, they obeyed me. Foreigners lost heart and came trembling out of their strongholds. The Lord lives. Blessed be my rock, and exalted be my God, the rock of salvation. The God who gave me vengeance and brought down peoples under me, who brought me out from my enemies. You exalted me among my adversaries. You delivered me from the violent. For this I will extol you, O Lord, among the nations, and sing praises to your name. He is the tower of salvation for his king, and shows steadfast love to his anointed, to David and his descendants forever.
God does love him some despot.
Isn't the Isaac? Isn't the last line a part of the food blessing? The prayer.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I was repeating this line constantly when. Well, I didn't do it in song. Yeah, I didn't do it in song. I just did it.
I think it's the
because
penultimate.
Yeah. Yemenites do it quickly.
But it's interesting because it does have a Greek, what do you call it? Greek sieve? Migdal or Magdil.
Yeah, Ketiv.
Yeah. And that's actually like Ashkenazim, I think, say Migdal, and or maybe not. I don't remember. So there's different like nusachot of the blessing. So some say Magdil, some say Migdal.
Okay, yeah. Okay. I'll start on verse. Sorry, just. I'll start on verse 28. Tsumura writes that this verse, quote, restates the theme of the song of Hannah at the beginning of Samuel, 1 Samuel 2, 7-8. God controls human destiny, humbling the proud but raising the humble.
Yes, raising them to be despots with slaves under them that he brought in from foreign lands. Boy, this is a man after God's own heart. God sucks.
The whole lot of killing people. You know, God creates people so that he can have those people kill all those other people.
And enslave them and grovel and beg and cry and plead. He does like that. Fucking sadist.
Tommy, did you talk about the style of poetry for this bit at all?
No, I didn't want to.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like, so, you know, it's not like a poem where you just have rhymes. It's kind of a bunch of like doublets of words that have similar meaning. Yeah. Like, you know, with the ones who are loyal to you, you deal loyally, or the simple one. Like, there's a lot of like
poetic parallelism.
Yeah, whatever it's called. Maybe it's not exactly throughout the entire poem, but it's like
Jewish poetry seems to be a lot of that rhyming ideas, repetitive ideas with slight variation, more so than rhyming words.
Yeah, like verse 26 is like im chasid tit chasad, im gibor tamim titamam, im nava titavar. They're like nouns and verbs that have similar sources, or whatever the word is.
Yeah. Okay, on 30, Anderson comments, the translation and interpretation of this verse is problematic. The verse might be paraphrased, quote, with your help I can charge a whole troop of foes single-handed. With the help of my God I can scale the enemy's walls, end quote. The verb arutz, I can run, is perhaps used elliptically, and therefore the preposition such as al, against, may be implied. McCarter reads arutz gedud, I can leap a gully, which would provide a parallel to the next colon. What is it, Isaac? Gully? What is it? I said gully.
No, gully, not golly, gully.
Oh, thank you for paraphrasing me. It's not golly, it's gully. Okay.
Gully.
Gully.
Golly, okay.
No.
Nowak follows
like
Kimchi's suggestion. No, I don't care. Nowak follows Kimchi's suggestion and derives arutz from ratzatz, to crush, and reads gader, wall, for gedud, troop. However, ratzatz is hardly ever used in military contexts. Thus, it seems that the verse depicts in hyperbolic language two warlike scenes where the psalmist, having derived his strength and courage from Yahweh, can therefore face any odds.
Yeah, apparently in Aramaic, Guda is a wall. So
It's also a cheese, but not the same one.
No, that's chalda.
I was about to say exactly that.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, but not the same one. No.
There's a difference
Okay.
between Gouda and chalda.
Yeah, I know. I made that remark in the pre-stream. Okay. On verse 31, McCarter writes that, quote, something is wrong in this verse, end quote. He notes that Cross and Friedman compared it with the first line of Deuteronomy 32:4. Quote, the crag whose work, pa'alo, is perfect, for all his deeds, derachav, are just, end quote. They ask if a similar second line might have fallen out of the poem. And with Proverbs 35, which is almost identical to the second and third lines of the present verse. He writes that most likely the second line of our verse is intrusive and is a Scrabble importation from Proverbs 35. Anderson writes that it is possible that an original bicolon has been expanded in the course of transmission. On verse 32, who is God besides the Lord? McCarter calls this, quote, a monotheistic formula, end quote, which appears in late literature from the 7th century. He writes that the word mibal'adeh, besides or apart from, occurs only in Joshua 22:19, which is late, and Deutero-Isaiah 43:11, 44:6 and 8, and 45:21. He writes that it is unlikely that this formula was part of the original poem, and that it was an expansion of from Isaiah 45:5. Tsumura, however, notes David Noel Friedman's dating of Hannah's song to the 10th century, and that the present psalm could be very old like that. Like Hannah's prayer, quote, Yahweh's incomparability and his uniqueness are juxtaposed, though implicitly.
It kind of reminds me of the song of Mipi El.
Yeah.
Which is who is like a god, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the...
Like,
yeah, I think this is the point where I gave up and just included 33 through 46.
Yeah. I mean, for the psalm, for any kind of psalms, that's understandable because they do repeat themselves a shit ton, and they're basically just saying the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I think the study of the psalms is going to be, more specialized and not necessarily as relevant to like the actual history and stuff. I mean, maybe you can use the study of, psalms to date it, but besides
when we get there in the Bible study. When we get there in the Bible study, we really need to find a way to just zoom through them.
Yeah.
And it may involve not reading all of the text on screen because...
Okay, so what we do is we just take turns. Each of us reads a psalm. We can read like 6 of them in a 2 or 3 hour period. And then Tomer's commentary will just be, it's all bullshit.
The professionals
or boring as fuck.
Yes, I mean some of them have some interesting bits in them, but
that's true.
I'll figure something out, I guess. I don't know. Okay, on 33 through 46, McCarter comments, a number of key terms in these verses have gone unrecognized or unexplained, with the result that the passage appears in most modern translations as a rather obscure description of Yahweh's equipping the psalmist for war, as the expression gird sturdily or gird with strength, i.e. armor, end quote, in verses 33 and 40 might suggest, and bringing him victory. In fact, however, the imagery is richer and more extravagant. Yahweh creates the psalmist, fashions him as an efficient and powerful fighting machine capable of subduing the earth. Verse 33 introduces both themes, the creation of the warrior and the subjugation of the earth. In verses 34 and 35, the divine manufacture of the psalmist is described. Yahweh first forms the 2 powerful legs and positions a warrior's body atop them, in verse 34. Then he attaches the hands and arms, in verse 35, tuned for fighting. The newly built fighting man is then granted a march of conquest, in verse 36. Set in motion, verse 37, with long, steady strides, he subdues his enemies, verses 38 through 43, and takes his position as an imperial ruler, verses 44 through 46.
Verse 35, by the way, evidence for the Book of Mormon by there.
Shut up.
I wonder why it doesn't occur to these people
I'm pretty sure I'm high.
if God created the whole world and everybody is related, according to the story and all like that, then why would there be favorite people, and why does everybody have to kill everybody else? Why would God not be advocating for everybody? It's like when you have a brood of children, you don't then take 2 of your sons and put them in Thunderdome, right?
You don't, Aaron, you don't. But we need to remember that some parents are really, really shitty. If you go onto r/insane parents, you find parents who act like God, and they are the worst people imaginable. They favorite one and exploit the other and do all kinds of crazy shit. Like, God is the father of us all, and fuck, he sucks.
And a lot of those insane parents are religious.
Yes, yeah. Quite a lot of them.
Yeah. Aaron, I know you definitely never played The Sims.
I could not picture Aaron playing Sims in a million years.
Yeah.
What did he say?
I know if you...
Have you ever played The
Sims?
No.
Yeah, see,
you would understand the power of being God.
There's a thing that a lot of people do when they play The Sims, which I never did, but some people do, where they'll put their Sims in the pool and then delete all the ladders so that they slowly drown. Basically, it's what would you do if you were God simulator, and it turns out a lot of people are assholes.
I did it when I was 10.
Okay.
Okay, and finally, on verse 51, to David and his descendants forever. McCarter notes that several scholars viewed this verse as an addition, intended to give the psalm closer application to the context identified in verse 1. However, more common is the view that only to David and his descendants is a later addition, quote, and actualizing, quote unquote, plus from the pen of the redactor who inserted the poem here, end quote. He notes that Viola argued that this phrase is Deuteronomistic. He writes, however, that the language, quote, seems appropriate to an old royal psalm. As Cross and Friedman point out, Meshicho, his anointed, uses a term found frequently in the oldest sources of Samuel. 1 Samuel 26:9 and 1 Samuel 26 verses 9, 11, and 16 and 23, and 2 Samuel 1, 14 and 16 and 19:22, and poses no obstacle to an early date for verse 51. End quote. He later writes, quote, the terminology of verse 51 then is that of Nathan's oracle and related passages. This might mean 1. That verse 51 is an original part of the psalm, which must stem from circles at the Jerusalem court, or conversely, 2. That verse 51, or at least verse 51c, is an addition based on Nathan's oracle, intended to associate a psalm that was not from the Jerusalem court with the house of David. We have reckoned with the possibility of a northern Israelite origin of the psalm. If this is correct, we shall have to bracket verse 51, or at least verse 51c, as secondary, end quote. Tsumura, however, takes verse 51 to be original, quote, in view of the fact that Nathan, the prophet of the Lord, in 7 verses 4 through 7, was also David's counselor, in 7 2 through 3, and the Jerusalem court. Verse 51 reminds us of the Lord's promise to David and his house, i.e. dynasty, of his seed, i.e. heir, and eternal throne in 7, 12 through 16. End quote. Now, Christians. I only have 2. Yeah. I know 2. That's Tertullian, who writes that as prophets foretold the cessation of the old law and carnal circumcision, they likewise declared the coming of a new law and spiritual circumcision in a people formerly ignorant of God, that is, the Gentiles. And Augustine writes that David's house could not attain peace except through Absalom's death, is parallel to the church's relationship with heretics, which mourns their loss, yet finds solace in the deliverance of many others. Yeah. Yeah, that's it.
Trust Christians to find an extra excuse to be really shitty to people. Good job.
Are we going to move on to 2 Samuel the 23rd?
I got a date. I gotta get this stuff.
Ooh, look at you.
Yeah, right.
Date.
Somehow I was speaking to a woman for more than a day and she hasn't ghosted me yet. Isn't it incredible?
It's amazing.
It's a miracle. I should start worshiping gourd.
Okay, Mark, you think that video got a ETA on that?
I think we're aiming for a couple of weeks
Okay.
to release, so we're excited.
Okay. All right. Anybody got any closing comments?
You gotta join the Discord and you gotta
Yes.
watch our Quran show.
Yeah.
Secular Ultra
Oh.
Quran.
Yeah.
Ultra Quran.
Yeah, secular Ultra Quran. Suck.
Oh, yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. And I should note that. Sorry.
Lawrence, but this week I posted Mark's channel first, so people can go subscribe so they can see the song when it comes out.
Yeah, please come on over, support our channel.
Yeah, Mark's wife is an excellent singer, and Mark has a fantastic camera on his phone. Seriously, what phone is that?
It's an iPhone.
Boo. Boo,
Yeah,
iPhone, boo.
I should note that on a personal note, tomorrow I start my semester. It's not going to affect the streams, hopefully, but it'll be busy for me. But I will start writing my thesis next year. Hopefully, I'll finish it next year.
Congratulations, Tomer.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Laters.